5 years ago, I slept on a mattress I found in the trash. I had no money, no friends who actually cared whether I lived or died, and that hurt more than the hunger, more than the cold. I remember lying there at night, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how I'd ended up so alone. Every phone call I made went unanswered. Every message left on read. I wasn't invisible, I was just disposable. But last week things changed. One by one they all came back, the same people who'd turned their backs on me. They showed up in expensive clothes, holding neatly wrapped gifts, wearing fake smiles that reeked of greed. It wasn't me they'd missed, it was the life I had now. The mansion, the cars, the whispers about my success. They thought I'd forgotten. They thought money had erased the years of silence. They were wrong. When I opened my front gate and welcomed them inside, I already knew exactly how the night would end. They didn't. I smiled as I shook their hands, pulling each of them into a polite hug, pretending I hadn't memorized every cruel word they'd once thrown at me. The smell of their expensive perfume and cologne filled the air, a reminder of the life they thought I could never touch. Now they were breathing my air, standing in my home. "Wow, you've really made it, huh?" Mark said, glancing around the marble hall, his voice dripping with false admiration. This was the same man who, 5 years ago, told me I was a waste of oxygen, when I asked him for help. I smiled back at him, hiding the memory like a blade behind my teeth. Dinner was warm, the wine flowed, and laughter echoed through the halls. But every joke, every story felt like a shallow performance. Their eyes weren't on me, they were on the gold frames, the crystal chandeliers, the rows of bottles in the glass cabinet at the back of the room. I knew what they were thinking. How much could they take from me this time? As the evening went on, I let the conversation drift toward the wine cellar, my new hobby, I called it. Their curiosity grew with every word. I told them about rare vintages, bottles worth more than their cars. They leaned in, eager to see it for themselves. I could almost hear the hunger in their voices. It wasn't for wine. I stood up, dusting off my jacket, and smiled. "You want to see it? The collection." The nods came instantly. The trap was set. I led them down the wide spiral staircase, each step echoing in the silence. The air grew cooler as we descended, the warm glow of the chandeliers replaced by dim amber lights embedded in the stone walls. My hand trailed along the smooth railing, my heart steady, my breath calm. They were too busy laughing, joking about which of them would accidentally drink the most expensive bottle, to notice how quiet I had become. At the bottom, I unlocked the heavy oak door and pushed it open. The wine cellar stretched before us, rows upon rows of bottles resting in mahogany racks, the air thick with the scent of cork and aged oak. "Damn," someone whispered, their voice low with awe. I stepped aside, letting them file in, their eyes darting greedily across the labels. I watched them touch things they didn't understand, heard them talk about value in numbers instead of meaning. In that moment they weren't friends, they weren't guests, they were scavengers. The same scavengers who had left me to starve when I had nothing. "Feel free to look around," I said softly, my voice almost drowned by the creak of the floorboards as they wandered deeper between the shelves. I stepped back toward the door, my hand finding the cold iron handle on the outside. Click. The sound was small, almost gentle, but it sliced through the air. One of them turned, confused. "Hey, did you just lock?" His words trailed off as the lights flickered, and the room settled into an uneasy silence. I smiled, not wide, not theatrical, just enough to feel the satisfaction warm my chest. The muffled thud of the lock still hung in the air like a whisper no one wanted to acknowledge. For a few seconds, they carried on as if nothing had happened, running their fingers over dusty bottles and reading dates aloud in fake French accents. But I could see it, that subtle stiffness in their shoulders, the way their glances began to dart toward the door every few moments. "Man, this place is insane," Derek said, lifting a bottle with both hands. The cork was darkened with age, the label faded almost to nothing. "How much is this worth? 10 grand? 20? He laughed, but his voice cracked in the middle. He was the first to notice that I hadn't moved from my spot near the door. "You're not coming in?" he asked, tilting his head toward me. His tone was casual, but I heard the strain beneath it. I simply shook my head. "I've seen it all before," I said, my voice low, calm. Too calm. They exchanged glances, the kind they thought I wouldn't notice. I let them stew in it for a while, pacing slowly along the outer edge of the room, dragging my fingertips across the cool stone walls. I knew every inch of this cellar, every brick, every secret space. And I knew that, despite the elegance, despite the polished wood and the soft lighting, it was a cage. Minutes passed. Conversation thinned. The hum of the air conditioning felt louder than it should have. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. Hey, can you open the door for a sec? I just need some fresh air. I smiled faintly but didn't move. You'll be fine, I said. It's just a cellar. No windows but plenty of air. You could stay down here for hours. Her smile faltered. Derek set the bottle down carefully and straightened his back. Okay, joke's over. Unlock the door. It's not locked, I lied smoothly. Push it yourself. He crossed the room in 3 quick steps and grabbed the handle. I watched the moment it happened, the shift in his face when the iron refused to turn. He tried again, harder this time. Nothing. His hand tightened, knuckles whitening. What the hell, man? He said, spinning around. His voice was sharper now. The others were watching me, their eyes narrowing. It was funny, not haha funny, but that slow, creeping kind of funny, how fast the air could change. One moment they were guests, the next, prey. Relax, I said, leaning casually against the wall. You wanted to see my wine collection. I'm just giving you time to appreciate it. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I could see the memories flashing in their eyes. 5 years ago when I was the one standing in front of them asking for help and they had all turned away. When they couldn't even spare a glance to see if I was breathing. The same people who now stood in my cellar, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of wine, thinking they were here because I forgave them. Derek tried the door again. Rachel stepped forward, her voice trembling. This isn't funny, okay? Let us out. You're right, I said quietly, pushing myself away from the wall. It's not funny. Not anymore. I walked toward them, slow and deliberate, my footsteps echoing against the stone. My shadow stretched across the floor, swallowing the light in front of me. Their eyes followed me like animals watching a predator circle. You remember the winter I slept in the alley behind Miller's Diner? I asked, my tone conversational. When I knocked on your door, Derek, and you told me you weren't in a position to help? When you, Rachel, crossed the street just so you wouldn't have to pass me? No one answered. I didn't expect them to. The silence was louder than any apology they could give. Well, I said, finally stopping a few feet from them, now we're in a different position. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small brass key, letting it dangle between my fingers. They stared at it like it was the last drop of water in a desert. Then, slowly I slipped it back into my pocket. Enjoy the wine, I said, turning toward the staircase. Dinner will be served shortly. The door closed behind me with a deep, resonant thud, and the lock clicked into place. This time I didn't bother to hide it. The lock's echo hadn't even faded before the first wave of panic set in. It was subtle, a tightness in their breathing, the restless shifting of feet. No one wanted to be the first to admit they felt trapped, but I could feel it leaking out of them like steam from a cracked pipe. You're not serious, right? Mark finally said. He had been quiet the whole time, the kind of quiet that pretends to be calm but is really just waiting for the perfect moment to explode. You're not actually gonna leave us here. I leaned against the doorframe, tilting my head like I was considering the question. Why would I leave you? I asked almost warmly. You're my guests. Rachel's voice cut in sharper now. Guests don't get locked in basements. I chuckled, but it wasn't the friendly kind. This isn't a basement. It's a cellar. There's a difference. Basements are cold, damp, miserable places. This, on the other hand, is luxury. Some of these bottles are worth more than a year of your rent. Derek stepped closer, his jaw tight. Cut the crap. Open the door. It's funny, I said, ignoring his tone. 5 years ago, I remember asking for just enough to buy a bus ticket. Not $1,000 bottle, not a room in a villa. Just a bus ticket. And you all couldn't find it in your hearts. Mark's eyes narrowed. So this is payback? Payback. I echoed softly as if tasting the word. No, I don't think you understand. This isn't about evening the score. It's about balance. Balance is when the weight of one side finally matches the weight of the other. You put me down there, I nodded toward the cold stone floor beneath us. And now, for a little while, I'm putting you here. A heavy silence followed. The hum of the cooling system pressed in on us, a constant reminder of the still air and the thick walls. Rachel took a small step back from the group, scanning the room for something. Maybe another exit, maybe just space to breathe. She found neither. Look, she said, her tone shifting, trying for diplomacy. We were younger. Stupid. We didn't know what you were going through. You didn't want to know, I corrected, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. Because knowing meant caring, and caring meant it might cost you something. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't argue because we both knew it was true. I moved toward the shelves, running my hand over the bottles, pretending to read labels while my mind replayed winter's past. The frostbite in my fingers, the way every bone in my body felt like it was breaking when I tried to sleep. The laughter I used to hear from warm houses I wasn't welcome in. And now, here they were, in my house, and every second they spent in that cellar was another stitch in the closure I'd been sewing for years. "You'll get food," I said casually, as if I were discussing the weather. "Not much, but enough. You'll get water too. I'm not a monster. I'm just not generous." Derek's voice rose again, harsh and desperate. "We're not staying here." He lunged for the door, slamming his shoulder into it. The wood groaned but didn't budge. He tried again. And again. By the third attempt he was panting, sweat on his forehead. The door didn't even shake. I watched him, not moving, until he finally stopped, breathing hard. "You'll hurt yourself," I said. "The hinges are reinforced steel. You could drive a car into that door and it wouldn't open." The reality of it began to settle in their faces. It wasn't just a prank anymore. It wasn't a game. They were inside and I held the key, both literally and in every other way that mattered. "I'll check on you later," I said, turning toward the stairs. "Enjoy your company. You might need each other more than you think." The lock clicked again, final and heavy. And for the first time in years I walked away from them without feeling small. The first day was quiet. Too quiet. I'd half expected them to scream, to pound on the door until their hands bled. Instead, the silence was their choice, a thin shield to hide the unease settling in their bones. I didn't go back that evening. I wanted them to sleep on it, to taste the stale air, to feel the weight of those stone walls pressing inward. Hunger has a way of changing people, but the anticipation of hunger, that's where the real breaking begins. On the second morning, I descended the stairs with a tin tray in hand. 4 bowls, each with a few pieces of dry bread and a bottle of water. Enough to keep them alive, not enough to keep them comfortable. Mark's eyes followed every movement I made as I set the tray down. "This is it?" he asked. His voice was flat, but I could hear the edge of panic sharpening underneath. "This is plenty," I said. "I survived on less for years. Remember?" Derek muttered something under his breath. I didn't ask him to repeat it. Let him keep some illusions of bravery, they wouldn't last long. Rachel tried again with a calm approach, her voice smooth but fraying at the edges. "We don't have to do this. You can just let us out and we can talk." "Oh, we will talk," I said, smiling faintly. "But not yet. Not until you're ready to listen." I turned to leave, but something made me pause at the doorway. I looked back at them, 4 people who once thought they were untouchable, now standing in a room smaller than the space between their kitchen counters and couches. I wanted them to feel it. Every inch of it. By the 4th day the cracks began to show. Mark had stopped making eye contact. Derek paced in slow, restless circles, as if movement alone could keep the walls from closing in. Rachel sat in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at a single point on the wall like she was trying to burn her way through it. When I brought their next meal, scraps from my own plate, crusts, half-eaten fruit, no one spoke. They just took the food and ate in silence. Pride tastes bitter, but hunger swallows it whole. On the 7th day I brought a bottle of wine down with me. A rare one, dusty, deep crimson label, aged longer than most of them had been loyal friends. I let it rest on the table, untouched. "You said you wanted to see my collection," I told them. "This is part of it. One of many. It's worth more than what I used to make in a year." Derek glared at the bottle like it had insulted him personally. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice rough, dry. I took my time answering, letting the question hang in the cold air. "Because you left me in the dark when I needed the light. Now, I'm just returning the favor." I turned to go, but this time Rachel's voice stopped me. "You've changed," she said quietly. I paused at the door, my hand on the lock. "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending to be someone worth abandoning." The door shut. The lock turned. And upstairs, I poured myself a glass from another bottle, one they'd never taste. By the 10th day the air in the basement had changed. It was heavier now, thick with the smell of unwashed skin and damp stone. The human spirit rots faster than the body when it's starved of dignity. I stopped bringing food every day. Sometimes I came after 24 hours. Sometimes after 36. Sometimes I skipped 2 days entirely. The unpredictability was the point. They could never prepare for when the next meal would come. On the 12th night, I woke to faint thuds echoing through the floorboards. I smiled to myself. Someone had finally broken. In the morning, I found Rachel standing by the door, her hands clasped together, her voice hoarse. "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry for what I did. I shouldn't have." She trailed off, swallowing the rest of the sentence like it hurt to say it. Asterisk. You shouldn't have? I asked, leaning on the doorway. Left you, she said finally, her eyes wet. We all made mistakes. No, I said. Mistakes are accidents. You made a choice. Her face twisted as the truth landed. I shut the door before she could say another word. Day 15. Derek snapped. He lunged at me when I stepped inside, his hands reaching for my throat. He was slower than I remembered. I shoved him back and he crashed into the wall. Mark didn't move to help him, just sat there chewing on his lip, staring at the floor. I should kill you right now. Derek spat, his voice breaking. You had your chance to destroy me years ago, I said calmly. And you took it. Now it's my turn. I left him screaming behind the locked door. The sound didn't bother me, it was just another proof that the cracks had turned into fractures. By day 18 they stopped speaking to each other. Survival had reduced them to animals, each guarding their portion of stale bread like it was gold, each sleeping with one eye open. The alliance they'd formed against me had collapsed under the weight of their own desperation. I started bringing the wine bottles down, one by one, placing them in the corner of the basement. I didn't open them. I didn't explain. I just let them sit there watching the pile grow. By the fifth bottle, Mark finally asked, Why? Because I want you to see what loyalty looks like, I said. These bottles stayed with me when you didn't. On day 21 I decided it was enough. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, holding a single key between my fingers. You can leave now, I said. They froze, unsure if it was a trick. Rachel was the first to stand. Mark followed. Derek hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the staircase. Why now? He asked slowly. Because I wanted you to know what it felt like to be forgotten, I said. And I think you do now. They didn't say thank you. They didn't apologize again. They just walked past me, their footsteps slow, stiff from weeks of confinement. I watched them leave without looking back. When the door finally closed behind them, I poured myself a glass of the oldest wine in my collection. I didn't drink to victory. I drank to silence. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about making sure they never forgot who I became without them.